Have you ever asked yourself, why me? Why am I the one they mock in meetings? Why am I the one they joke about at dinner parties when no one else is even blinking? Let me tell you something hard and honest. It's not luck. It's not coincidence. It's a pattern, and it says more about them than it ever could about you. You see, people don't humiliate you at random. They do it for control, for ego, for the approval of a silent crowd. And often because they see something in you that they don't understand but deeply resent. Your composure, your strength, your quiet dignity. And more often than not, because you haven't drawn the line that says, this far, no further. In this video, we're going to break down 6 deeply rooted reasons why people choose to humiliate others. But more importantly, we'll explore how the ancient wisdom of Stoicism can give you the inner strength to rise above it. Not by shouting back, not by plotting revenge, but by becoming untouchable from the inside out. The dignity of your life, that's your job to protect. No one else is going to do it for you. And yet some people, they make undermining that dignity their own private sport. You know the type. They slip in a harmless jab when you're speaking. They interrupt you with a smirk during a meeting. They toss out a joke with your name in it, and somehow everyone laughs except you, and in that moment, there's silence. That heat in your chest, that quiet humiliation you pretend to brush off with a smile, but it stings deeper than you'd ever admit. You wonder, is it me? Do I come off as weak? Do I look like I don't belong here? Let me stop you right there. No, you don't. And no, you're not the problem. You're the target. Not because you're weak, but because they're looking for someone to project their own discomfort onto. And the moment they sense you won't fight back, they'll test the limits of what they can get away with. But here's where everything begins to change. Because today, I'll show you exactly why they do it. And how you can take back control, not with noise, but with clarity, with calm, with the quiet, unshakable self-respect of someone who no longer entertains disrespect, even in silence. This isn't about stoicism as some emotionless mask. It's about strength, control, the ability to remain grounded in the face of humiliation without flinching. So if you're tired of biting your tongue, tired of smiling through disrespect, tired of asking yourself why you, then this is for you. Comment yes if you're ready to stand tall. Hit that subscribe button, tap the bell, and let's begin the journey towards self-mastery, one boundary at a time. Reason 1. They sense you haven't found your own worth yet. This is the wound that cuts the deepest, not because it's loud, but because it's silent. Not because others see it, but because you haven't. It's the kind of pain many carry quietly, that feeling of being humiliated, dismissed, or belittled before you ever had the chance to understand just how much you were worth. It often begins early in life. Maybe in childhood, maybe in your teens, or during a vulnerable season when your identity was still forming. And it doesn't take much. A few cutting remarks, a teacher's sarcasm, a parent's silence when you needed validation the most. And those who humiliate, they sense it, not because you're broken, not because you're weak, but because you haven't fully realized the strength that's already inside you. It's not physical weakness, it's not intellectual, it's something quieter, a lack of rootedness. When you don't yet know who you are, you sway in the wind of other people's opinions. And some people have an almost predatory instinct for that. They can tell when your sense of worth is fragile, and they test it with a joke that bites a little too hard, a public comment wrapped in a smile, a backhanded compliment meant to keep you small. Because here's the truth, if you were solid in yourself, if your identity were rooted deep beneath the surface, their words wouldn't land. they'd bounce off something unshakable. But without that anchor, you become vulnerable to every look, every laugh, every judgment. You start measuring your value by the way people respond to you. You become hyper-aware of their approval and terrified of their rejection. You begin to bend, trying to please, to fit, to blend in. You shapeshift, not out of strength, but out of survival. But Epictetus gave us a truth the world still struggles to hear: no man is free who is not master of himself. We often chase freedom in all the wrong places. We think it comes from success, status, appearance, money. But none of that will ever make you free, because freedom begins with self-mastery. And self-mastery begins with knowing who you are. When you truly know yourself, the world loses its power to shame you. The insults no longer stick, the jokes lose their sting, and the opinions of others, whether applause or ridicule, stop controlling your emotions. It's not arrogance, it's clarity. Consider the life of Eleanor Roosevelt. She wasn't born confident. She wasn't raised to believe she had power. In fact, her early years were riddled with rejection. Her mother openly mocked her, calling her granny because of how she looked. She lost both parents before age 10 and was raised in a family that made sure she felt unwanted. By all accounts, she should have disappeared into the background. But she didn't. She slowly, deliberately and courageously built herself from the inside out, through education, through service, through developing convictions so clear that no one could shake them. Later, as First Lady, she was relentlessly criticized, mocked for her appearance, her voice, her activism. But those humiliations didn't define her, because she had already done the hardest work. She had decided who she was, and that's the secret. Not that the world stopped trying to humiliate her, but that she stopped letting them succeed. That's what Stoicism teaches us. No one can humiliate you without your consent. No one can define you unless you let them. The insults only land when you believe them. The mockery only hurts when you think it might be true. But when you're rooted in your identity, it all becomes noise, background static. Even admiration loses its pull, because your self-respect no longer rises and falls based on someone else's opinion. This isn't easy. It takes time, it takes healing, it takes reflection, and often solitude. But once you know who you are, once you master your own mind, you become something very rare in this world, untouchable. Reason 2, they sense you won't push back. Some people don't raise their voices. They don't insult you outright. They test you quietly, deliberately, just like predators test their prey. They don't walk in waving red flags. They watch, they wait, they study how you move in a room. They pay attention to the way you lower your gaze when challenged, how you smile when you're uncomfortable, how you laugh when the joke's on you, even when it cuts deep. And the second they sense hesitation, the instant they detect doubt in your own worth, they strike. But not with fists, with comments, with jabs dressed as jokes, with sarcasm cloaked in a smile. And if you stay silent, if you let it slide, if you tell yourself it's not worth making a scene, they don't see your silence as grace. They see it as permission, because people like that don't stop on their own. They stop when you show them that you're not who they thought you were. I learned this the hard way. Early in my career, I worked under a manager named Victor. On the surface, he was clever, charismatic, the kind of leader people respected, or at least pretended to. But behind closed doors, he had a gift for finding people's insecurities and digging into them like an exposed nerve. During team meetings, he'd toss out lines like, "Maybe this is a little over your head," or "We'll give you a minute to catch up," always with that smirk, just loud enough for everyone to hear, just soft enough to claim it was just teasing. At first I laughed along. Everyone else did. I told myself it wasn't personal, that I was just being too sensitive. But it was personal, and it was getting worse, because every time I let it pass, every time I said nothing, I was teaching him how to treat me. I was showing him how much disrespect I was willing to absorb without flinching. That's when I learned something crucial. People like Victor aren't careless. They're calculated. They are testing your tolerance, your threshold. And when you don't enforce it, they keep pushing. This is where Stoicism changed everything for me. Not the fake kind where you pretend nothing bothers you. Not the emotionless mask some people mistake for strength. I'm talking about real Stoicism, the kind Marcus Aurelius lived by when he said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." You can't control whether someone will try to humiliate you, but you can control whether they succeed. You get to decide whether their words shape your reality or bounce off like rain on steel. Here's a hard truth no one tells you soon enough. If you don't respect yourself, no one else will. If you tolerate humiliation, you don't just endure it, you invite it again. Not because you asked for it, but because you silently signaled that you'll accept it. Humans test hierarchies. We all do it, consciously or not. We push to see where the line is, and if there's no resistance, if there's no boundary, we assume there's no limit. That's not always malicious. Sometimes it's just opportunity, but either way, it's your responsibility to draw the line and to hold it. Standing up for yourself doesn't always mean confrontation. It doesn't have to be loud. In fact, the most powerful moments are often the quietest. It looks like not laughing when someone throws a joke at your expense. It looks like holding someone's gaze, without flinching, without smiling, letting your silence speak for you. It looks like leaving a room where your dignity is being chipped away, without apology, without explanation. That's Stoic strength. Not because it's cold, but because it's deliberate. It's discipline over drama, clarity over chaos. You have to protect your dignity, not because others will, but because it's yours and no one else is responsible for it. And here's what happens the moment you do. People feel it. Those who used to push and prod begin to hesitate. They pull back because they're not looking for a challenge. They're looking for an easy target. And suddenly, you're not one anymore. You don't need to explain your boundaries. You don't need to justify your strength. You just need to stand in it, because the respect you earn from others pales in comparison to the respect you begin to earn from yourself. That's when everything changes. You begin to trust yourself, not because the world got softer, but because you got stronger, not by controlling others, but by mastering your response to them. That's what Stoicism offers. Not a shield to hide behind, but armor to walk through life with quiet confidence, upright, unshaken, unapologetically dignified. Reason 3, you haven't drawn the line, so they cross it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you don't set boundaries, people will set them for you. They won't always mean harm, not at first, but human nature is wired to explore limits, to test, to push, just a little, until they hear stop. And if they don't hear it, they assume there is no line at all. A joke at your expense, a favor taken for granted, a comment that makes you flinch on the inside, but you laugh it off because you don't want to be dramatic. You tell yourself it's not worth the trouble. that it's just how they are, that they didn't mean it that way, and so they keep going, because silence isn't neutral. In the absence of a boundary, people assume consent. Over time, the space they take grows. In your conversations, in your calendar, in your energy, little by little, you look around and realize you are standing in a life that no longer feels like your own. The respect you thought was obvious, that your time matters, that your voice has weight, that your feelings should count, has been quietly, almost imperceptibly, replaced. Now, disrespect has become routine, and you wonder, how did it get this far? But deep down, you know the answer. It started the moment you failed to say, "That's enough." This is exactly why Epictetus warned, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. It sounds harsh, even unfair, but it reveals a truth most people avoid. Setting boundaries comes with a social cost. When you draw a line, you will be misunderstood. People may call you difficult, cold, or even arrogant, especially the ones who benefited most from your silence. Why? Because boundaries change the terms of the relationship. And for some people, that shift threatens their comfort, not your well-being. But here's the thing. If you want peace, you cannot also chase approval. You cannot seek both. Stoicism teaches us that peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of discipline, the discipline to stand your ground, even if it means standing alone. Look at Oprah Winfrey. Early in her career, she was a young news reporter working in Baltimore. She was told flat out she wasn't right for TV. Producers criticized her looks, her voice, her weight, They said she needed to change, to mold herself into someone more marketable, and for many people that would have been enough to bend, to shrink, to become someone else for the sake of staying in the room. But Oprah didn't bend. She drew a line. She chose authenticity over acceptance. Eventually she was fired, and many thought that proved her wrong, but she knew better. She understood what Epictetus meant. Sometimes you have to be willing to look foolish, to risk rejection. Not because you're wrong, but because you're right too early. And we know how that story ended. She built an empire, rooted in empathy, truth, and unshakable self-respect. Not because she followed someone else's rules, but because she honored her own. That is the essence of Stoicism. You don't set boundaries so people will like you. You set them because you refuse to live a life where your worth is negotiable. And when you do, calmly, clearly, consistently, people either learn to respect your line or they walk away, and either outcome, that's peace. But it's not easy. It means being willing to let go of the version of you that everyone finds convenient. It means being okay with being called too much by people who were never enough. It means standing firm when the world wants you to bend. True dignity often comes with solitude. But solitude isn't weakness. It's where strength is born. And when you live from that space, when your self-respect becomes the ground beneath your feet, everything begins to shift. Those who stay, they know where the line is, and those who can't accept it, they were never meant to walk beside you anyway. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you don't set boundaries, people will set them for you. They won't always mean harm, not at first. But human nature is wired to explore limits, to test, to push just a little until they hear stop. And if they don't hear it, they assume there is no line at all, a joke at your expense, a favor taken for granted, a comment that makes you flinch on the inside, but you laugh it off because you don't want to be dramatic. You tell yourself it's not worth the trouble, that it's just how they are, that they didn't mean it that way, and so they keep going, because silence isn't neutral. In the absence of a boundary, people assume consent. Over time, the space they take grows in your conversations, in your calendar, in your energy. Little by little, you look around and realize you are standing in a life that no longer feels like your own. The respect you thought was obvious, that your time matters, that your voice has weight, that your feelings should count, has been quietly, almost imperceptibly, replaced. Now, disrespect has become routine, and you wonder, how did it get this far? But deep down you know the answer. It started the moment you failed to say, "That's enough." This is exactly why Epictetus warned, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. It sounds harsh, even unfair, but it reveals a truth most people avoid. Setting boundaries comes with a social cost. When you draw a line, you will be misunderstood. People may call you difficult, cold, or even arrogant, especially the ones who benefited most from your silence. Why? Because boundaries change the terms of the relationship. And for some people, that shift threatens their comfort, not your well-being. But here's the thing. If you want peace, you cannot also chase approval. You cannot seek both. Stoicism teaches us that peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of discipline, the discipline to stand your ground, even if it means standing alone. Look at Oprah Winfrey. Early in her career, she was a young news reporter working in Baltimore. She was told, flat out, she wasn't right for TV. Producers criticized her looks, her voice, her weight. They said she needed to change, to mold herself into someone more marketable. And for many people, that would have been enough to bend, to shrink, to become someone else for the sake of staying in the room. But Oprah didn't bend. She drew a line. She chose authenticity over acceptance. Eventually, she was fired, and many thought that proved her wrong. But she knew better. She understood what Epictetus meant. Sometimes you have to be willing to look foolish, to risk rejection. Not because you're wrong, but because you're right too early. And we know how that story ended. She built an empire, rooted in empathy, truth, and unshakable self-respect. Not because she followed someone else's rules, but because she honored her own. That is the essence of Stoicism. You don't set boundaries so people will like you. You set them because you refuse to live a life where your worth is negotiable. And when you do, calmly, clearly, consistently, people either learn to respect your line or they walk away. And either outcome, that's peace. But it's not easy. It means being willing to let go of the version of you that everyone finds convenient. It means being okay with being called too much by people who were never enough. It means standing firm when the world wants you to bend. True dignity often comes with solitude. But solitude isn't weakness. It's where strength is born. And when you live from that space, when your self-respect becomes the ground beneath your feet, everything begins to shift. Those who stay, they know where the line is. And those who can't accept it, they were never meant to walk beside you anyway. Reason 5, they need an audience, because without one, they're nothing. Humiliation almost never happens in the dark. It doesn't hide in quiet corners. It performs, it looks for a crowd. Why? Because humiliation is about more than hurting you. It's about turning your pain into a show. The people who try to shame you in front of others don't just want to insult you. They want spectators. They want silent accomplices. They want witnesses who will laugh or worse, say nothing. Because without that audience, their power feels small, empty, fragile. You've seen this before. In the conference room, where someone in charge cuts down a colleague, not because they made a mistake, but because they need to remind. The room who's in control, in a classroom where a quiet student is picked on, not for what they did, but because they stood alone. That's how humiliation thrives, not through strength, but through isolation. Bullies don't always pick the weakest. They pick the most isolated, because if no one steps in, if no one pushes back, the crowd becomes a cage, and the silence, it speaks just as loud as laughter. There's an unsettling truth about human nature. Crowds are easier to manipulate than individuals. Psychologists call it de-individuation. It's when people in a group lose their personal sense of responsibility. They go along with things they'd never support on their own. They'll laugh even if they feel uncomfortable. They'll stay silent even when they know it's wrong. Because they're afraid that if they speak up, they'll be next. The person leading the humiliation knows this. They count on it. They rely on your silence. Their cruelty becomes a kind of performance, using your shame to entertain others and to protect their own insecurity. But make no mistake, what looks like strength is often desperation in disguise. A person who must rally a crowd to destroy someone else is not powerful. They're scared to stand alone, scared that without applause, without reinforcement, they'll disappear. Compare that to Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, one of the most powerful men to ever live. He was surrounded by senators, soldiers, and courtiers who bowed to him, praised him, served him, and yet Marcus was known not for arrogance, but humility. He didn't belittle others to prove his dominance. He didn't need a crowd to validate his worth. In fact, he often reminded himself to ignore the opinions of those who lacked wisdom. He wrote, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." Marcus understood something the world still forgets. Crowd approval is fickle, laughter fades, and the loudest voices are often the most fearful. So, when someone humiliates you in public, remember this: their sharpest weapon isn't their words. It's the crowd's reaction. They want you to feel alone. They want you to believe the silence or laughter means you've lost. But here's the truth: their laughter is empty. Their silence is fear. And none of it defines you. You don't owe the audience an explanation. You don't owe your critic a defense. And you certainly don't owe your dignity to anyone who treats it like a punchline. The Stoic path doesn't teach you to dominate the room. It teaches you to stand firm, even when no one stands with you. To walk away from crowds that demand your submission. To value your clarity more than their cheers. Because here's the final truth: you don't need an audience to know your worth. You don't need the approval of people who cheer for the loudest voice in the room. You need only your own steady mind, your own clear sense of what's right, and the discipline to stand tall when everything around you says to shrink. That is Stoicism. That is real power. Not in applause, not in the fear of others, but in the quiet, unshakable dignity of someone who refuses to be made small by the noise of the crowd. And if what you just heard resonated with you, give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe. Because every time I uncover another perspective on life and power, I want you to be the first to hear it. Reason 6, they envy you. This may be the hardest truth to accept, but it's the one that will set you free. Sometimes people humiliate you, not because you've failed, but because you've succeeded in ways they can't explain. Not because you're flawed, but because you remind them painfully of everything they've abandoned in themselves. Your strength unsettles them. Your consistency disturbs them. Your quiet confidence, it shines a light on every corner of their self-doubt. And instead of rising to meet that light, they choose the easier path. They tear you down, not to challenge you, not to help you grow, but to silence the voice inside them screaming, "You could have been more." This is envy, but not the passing kind we all feel from time to time. This is something darker. Psychologists call it malicious envy. It's the twisted sibling of normal jealousy. And it doesn't want what you have. It wants to see you fall. It's the kind of envy that hides in fake compliments, that shows up as harmless jokes, that claps when you're in the spotlight, but quietly hopes you stumble on your way off stage. Researchers even have a name for this. It's called schadenfreude, the strange, perverse satisfaction people feel when someone they envy hits a low point. Because your light makes them feel exposed, and instead of searching for their own spark, they'd rather blow out yours, not because you're weak, but because deep down, they know you're not. Seneca saw this long before it had a name. He wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, who is poor." That line cuts to the bone. A person can have money, status, and admiration, and still live in spiritual poverty if their soul is starved for peace, and so they strike. Not to wound you, but to feed themselves. They humiliate what they secretly desire, because destroying what they admire feels easier than becoming it. But here's where everything begins to shift. Once you understand this, the shame you once carried, it begins to dissolve. You stop thinking there's something wrong with you. You stop wondering what you did to deserve it. And in its place, clarity, compassion, not the kind that excuses cruelty, but the kind that no longer lets it define you. You realize their bitterness is not your burden. Their emptiness is not yours to fill. Stoicism teaches us you cannot control what others do, but you can control what you make it mean. So when someone humiliates you out of envy, you do not bend. You do not soften yourself to make them feel taller. You stand, not in arrogance, but in rooted truth, in the quiet certainty of who you are and who you're no longer willing to shrink for. Their discomfort in your presence is not your responsibility. It never was. And here's the truth that will carry you forward. You were never too much. They were just unprepared for someone who didn't need their permission to shine. So let them squirm, let them gossip, let them throw stones in the dark. You don't owe them your silence. You don't owe them your light. You owe yourself your full height, your voice, your dignity, your peace. And when you choose to stand in it, unshaken, undimmed, you become untouchable in the most powerful way, because no one can humiliate you. When you know deep in your bones that their envy is just a reflection of your strength. Final reflection. Your power was never theirs to take. This isn't easy. No one said it would be. Becoming untouchable isn't about becoming cold or detached. It's about doing the hard, quiet work, the kind of work that doesn't get applause, the kind you do in solitude, with a mirror, a journal, or just an honest moment with yourself. It takes time to reflect, time to ask the harder questions. Who am I? What do I stand for? And what will I no longer tolerate in silence? It takes courage, not the loud, chest-thumping kind, but the kind that lets you stand still when everyone else wants you to shrink. Because the truth is this: there is no shortcut to freedom. You can't buy it. You can't beg for it. You certainly can't wait for someone else to give it to you. Real freedom, the kind that no humiliation can reach, is claimed quietly, without permission, without applause. And when you finally claim it, something incredible happens. The people who once tried to belittle you lose interest. The words they used to wound you no longer land. They hit something solid and fall flat, not because the world suddenly became kind, but because you became strong. So here's the truth. Yes, people will try to humiliate you. Some will test your silence. Some will resent your confidence. And some will strike simply because they can't bear your light while they remain in darkness. But here's the good news. You are no longer here to shrink, not for their comfort, not for their approval, not for their insecurity. You are not someone who begs for respect. You command it, quietly, calmly, and if need be, alone. That's the Stoic way. You don't fight for validation. You don't flinch in the face of cruelty. You stand not because the noise has stopped, but because your mind is still. And in that stillness, something unshakable rises. You stop asking, "Why me?" And you start declaring, "Not anymore." Because when you refuse to accept the lies designed to make you small, when you hold your dignity like armor, when you choose to stand tall in rooms that tried to break you, you become something extraordinary. You become untouchable, not because life got easier, but because you got clearer on who you are, clearer on what matters, clearer on what no longer deserves access to your peace. So if you're ready to live with that kind of quiet power, to rise above the noise, to stop shrinking and start standing, I invite you to take this journey with me. Tap that subscribe button, ring the bell, and join a community of people learning to live by something deeper than approval. Because in the end, the world doesn't give you dignity. You give it to yourself. And once you do, no one can take it away. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.